She was 19 years old, and she had $47. Not $47 in a bank. She did not have a bank. She had a folded 20, a 10, a 5, 10 ones, and $2.31 in coins. All of it rolled into an empty coffee can that she kept at the bottom of a duffel bag, under a spare shirt, under a wool blanket she had taken from a shelter in Odessa the week she turned 18 and aged out of the system. That was the sum of what she owned. $47, a duffel bag, and a single photograph of a woman she could barely remember. Her name was Josie Marren, and on a Tuesday in June, in a town she had never heard of until 3 weeks earlier, she raised her hand at a county auction and bought an abandoned water park for $10. She did not buy it because she wanted a water park. She was 19 and she had been sleeping behind a laundromat, and the listing said there was a maintenance building on the property with plumbing that still worked. That was all she wanted. A roof, a door that locked, a shower with real water in it. She had done the math the way she did all her math, in her head, in the dark, and $10 for a place nobody could throw her out of seemed, that Tuesday, like the best deal she had ever been offered. She did not know that the man who had built the place had spent the last 18 years of his life looking for her. She did not know that under the cracked blue floor of the wave pool, past a tunnel of poured concrete, behind a steel door that had not been opened since before she was born, there was a room, and she did not know what was in it. But to understand how a girl with $47 came to own 14 acres in Delgado County, Texas, and to understand why an old man had left a light on for her for 18 years without ever knowing her name, we need to go back. Not far. Just to the spring she turned 19 and the long road that brought her to Harlow. Josie Marren had aged out of foster care on the 8th of March, the year she turned 18, which happened to be her birthday. The state of Texas did not do this on purpose. It was simply how the calendar fell. On the 7th, she was a ward of the state, with a caseworker named Deb and a bed in a group home off Loop 250 in Midland. On the 8th, she was an adult, and the bed belonged to someone else by dinner. She had known it was coming. They told you from the time you were 16, the way you might tell a person about weather. There were papers to sign and a folder, a blue folder with a photocopied checklist inside, and $140 they called a transition stipend. She had spent 11 years in the system by then, since she was 7, in 6 different houses in 3 different towns, and she had learned early that the safest thing to own was nothing, because nothing could not be taken from you, and nothing did not have to be packed in a hurry. So she owned almost nothing. And she left the group home on the morning of her 18th birthday with the duffel bag and the blue folder and the $140. And for a while, she did the things the folder told her to do. She got a job at a car wash on Rankin Highway, drying cars in the heat for $11 an hour. She rented a room by the week in a house with 4 other people, and when the man who owned the house started standing too close to her in the kitchen, she left in the night. She got another job at a chicken place, and lost it when her car, a 1998 Honda with 214,000 miles that she had bought for $600, threw a rod on the interstate, and she could not get to work 3 days running. That was the thing nobody in the blue folder explained. How fast it went. How one broken thing led to the next broken thing. And how a person could do everything right, could show up and be quiet and work hard and never ask anybody for anything, and still end up, at 19, sitting on a curb outside a gas station with a duffel bag and $47, watching the heat shimmer up off the asphalt and wondering which direction to walk. She was not bitter about it, and that surprised people later, when they got to know her. She had a flat, steady way of talking about the worst things that had happened to her, the same way she talked about the weather, and it made some people think she did not feel them. She felt them. She had just learned that saying them out loud did not change them, and so she kept the feeling behind her eyes and let her face stay still. The one thing she carried that was not useful was the photograph. It was a color photograph, 3.5 by 5. The edges soft as cloth from being handled. It showed a girl of maybe 18 or 19 standing in front of a wall of bright blue water. The girl wore a red one-piece swimsuit and a silver whistle on a cord around her neck, and she was laughing at something out of frame, one hand up shading her eyes. On the back, in blue ballpoint, someone had written a single word: Danielle. Danielle was her mother. Josie knew that much and almost nothing else. Her mother had died when Josie was 7, in the winter, in a rented duplex in Odessa, and Josie remembered only fragments of her, the way you remember a dream after the middle of the day. A voice singing in another room. The smell of cigarettes and green apple shampoo. A cold morning, men in the doorway, and a woman in a cardigan crouching to Josie's height and saying, in a gentle voice, that she was going to take her somewhere safe now. After that, there was no mother. There was the system, and the folder, and the long line of houses. She did not know where the photograph had been taken, or whose blue water that was, or what her mother had been laughing at. She had asked, once or twice, early on, and the answer was always the same shrug. Nobody knew. It had come in the box of her mother's things the state kept, a shoebox with a birth certificate and a hospital bracelet and 40 or 50 photographs, and by the time Josie was old enough to want them, the box had been reduced to the one picture, the rest lost in some transfer between offices. Danielle, in a red suit, laughing in front of a wall of blue. Josie had looked at that photograph maybe 10,000 times. She had it memorized down to the water stain in one corner. And if you had asked her, that June, whether she believed in signs, she would have looked at you with her flat, steady face and told you no. She did not believe in signs. She believed in what was in front of her and what was in her coffee can, and that was all. Which is what made it so strange, later, that she ended up in Harlow at all. She got to Harlow the way she got everywhere, by accident and by ride. A trucker named Sal, who hauled cattle feed and did not ask her any questions, had taken her as far as a crossroads town called Sweetwater, and from there a woman going to see her sister took her another 50 miles south and west into the flat brown country where the cotton had been and mostly wasn't anymore, and dropped her at the edge of Harlow. It was late afternoon. The town sat low against the horizon, a water tower with the paint peeling off the H, a grain elevator, 2 churches, a row of storefronts where half the windows were soaped over. 99 degrees. Josie shouldered her duffel and walked in, because walking was free, and she needed water and shade before dark. She found both behind a laundromat on 2nd Street. There was a covered alcove where the dryer vents let out, warm even at night, and a spigot on the outside wall that worked, and a dumpster that the bakery 2 doors down filled every evening with the day's unsold bread. It was not the worst place she had ever slept. It was not close to the worst. She washed at the spigot, ate half a loaf of day-old white bread, and lay down on the flattened cardboard she found behind the dumpster, and she listened to the town go quiet around her, and she thought, the way she thought every night, that tomorrow she would figure out the next thing. She stayed in Harlow 11 days before the auction, and in those days she made herself useful the way she had learned to, quietly and without being asked twice. She swept the laundromat in exchange for the machines, and the woman who ran it, a heavy-set woman named Ronette who did not smile much but noticed things, started leaving a folded 5 on the change table some mornings. She stacked feed sacks at the co-op for a man who paid cash and did not report the hours. She pulled weeds from the flower beds in front of the Methodist church for a lady who gave her $10 and a sack of tomatoes and told her God had a plan, and Josie thanked her and did not say what she thought, which was that if God had a plan, he was running behind on it. She was good at being invisible, a skill you learned in group homes, where the loud kids got noticed and the noticed kids got hurt. So she moved through Harlow like a shadow at the edge of things, watching the town the way she watched everything, filing away who was kind and who was not and where the free water was. And in that watching, she began to understand the place. She understood that Harlow was dying, slowly, the way a big tree dies, one limb at a time. There had been a cotton gin once, and it had closed. There had been a meat-packing plant on the highway, Delgado Meat Company, that had employed 300 people, and it had closed too. In a year, everybody said the way you say the name of a flood. 2009. After 2009, the young people left and did not come back, and the storefronts got soaped over one by one. She heard it in pieces, from Ronette, from the men at the co-op, from the old-timers who drank coffee at the Dairy Mart. Harlow talked about its own, dying the way it talked about the drought, as a thing that was simply happening, that no one could stop. And she understood, though it took her longer to notice, that there was a name people in Harlow said a certain way, a soft way, with a small pause before it, the way you say the name of a person who is gone. Emmett, or Mr. Roche, if they were being formal. She heard it first from an old man at the Dairy Mart who was telling a story about a hard winter, and he said, and of course Emmett covered it, the way you'd say, and of course the sun came up. She heard it again from Ronette, who mentioned that her late husband had drawn a check from Emmett for 6 years after the plant let him go, and Emmett hadn't owed him a thing. Josie did not know who Emmett was. She did not ask. It was not her business, and asking questions got you remembered, and being remembered was dangerous. She found the auction the way she found everything, by reading what other people threw away. It was a single sheet of paper, printed at the county, tacked to the corkboard inside the dairy mart where people put up notices about hay for sale and dogs that were lost. Notice of public sale. It said across the top, Delgado County surplus and tax defaulted property. There was a date, the 16th of June, and a time, 10 in the morning, and a place, the county courthouse, and below that a list of parcels with numbers and short descriptions and something the sheet called a minimum bid. Most of the parcels were land. Bare land, 5 acres here, 40 acres there, out in the county, the kind of dry brush that would not grow anything and that people let go for the taxes. The minimum bids on those were in the hundreds and the thousands. But near the bottom of the list, there was a line that made Josie stop. Parcel 114, 3300, former Oasis Water Park, 14.2 acres, including structures. F meters 219. Minimum bid $10. $10. She read it 3 times to be sure the decimal was where she thought it was. $10 and no cents for 14 acres, and, it said, structures. Structures meant buildings. Buildings meant a roof. She knew better than to get excited. $10 things were $10 for a reason. There was always a catch. Back taxes you inherited, a lien, a building so far gone the county would rather pay you to take it. But she knew how to find out. The sheet said interested parties could inspect in advance, and it gave an address. And that afternoon Josie walked the 3.5 miles out F meters 219 in the heat to see what $10 could buy. She smelled it before she saw it. A faint mineral smell, like a swimming pool but wrong, dead somehow. Then the road curved, and there it was behind a chain-link fence gone orange with rust, a slope of hardpan and cracked asphalt, and rising above the Mosquito Tower she recognized without ever having seen it, 2 water slides, one blue and one yellow, spiraling down from a platform 40 feet in the air, faded to the color of old chalk, the yellow slide broken off halfway down so it ended in the sky. There was a sign over the gate, an arch of iron letters, most of the paint gone, but the shapes still there. Oasis. And under it, smaller, in a scrolling script, where Harlow comes to play. A hawk sat on the S and watched her come. Josie stood at the fence a long time. She did not know why. It was just a dead water park, the kind that dotted the whole dry middle of the country, built in the boom years and abandoned in the bust. And she had seen 100 abandoned things and felt nothing for any of them. But something about the blue slide against the white sky, and the smell of the mineral water, and the hawk, made her chest do something it did not usually do. And she stood at the fence, and looked, and could not have told you what she was looking for. The gate was chained, but the chain was long, and she slid through the gap and walked the property the way a buyer walks it, looking for what was wrong. There was plenty wrong. The lazy river was a dry concrete trench full of tumbleweeds and one dead mesquite. The snack pavilion, long and open-sided under a peaked tin roof, had lost half that roof to some old wind, and pigeons lived in the rest. The wave pool, the big one, the centerpiece, was the size of a football field and shaped like a fan, drained, its bottom cracked in a great jagged web and filled with 2 feet of silt and blown sand and black standing water in the low end, and it smelled like the inside of a well. Painted on the floor of it, still faintly blue, were the lane lines and the depth markers. 3 feet, 5 feet, 9 feet at the deep end where the wave machine had been. And at the far edge of the property, half hidden behind a stand of salt cedar, there was a low cinder block building with a flat roof and a green metal door. The maintenance building. Josie walked to it and tried the door, and it was locked. But there was a window, and through the window she could see a concrete room with a workbench and shelves and, in the back corner, a utility sink and what was unmistakably a shower stall, an industrial one, tiled, with a drain in the floor. There was a wall of gauges and valves, the pool's old pump controls. And running along the ceiling, conduit and pipe, which meant the building had once had power and water, and might again. She stood at that window a long time, too. Then she walked the 3.5 miles back into town, And that night, behind the laundromat, she counted her money, $47. And she thought about it the way she thought about everything, plainly, without hope and without despair. $10 was a fifth of everything she had. If the park came with back taxes she could not pay, she would lose it and the $10 both. If the water did not work, or the county shut it off, the shower was just a tiled box. But a locked door was a locked door. And she had not had one of those in a long time. On the morning of the 16th, she washed at the spigot and put on her cleanest shirt and walked to the courthouse, a square brick building with a Confederate soldier out front that somebody had spray painted and somebody else had scrubbed, so the soldier was two colors now. The auction was in a room on the second floor with folding chairs and a ceiling fan that turned too slowly to do anything. There were maybe 20 people there, farmers mostly, a couple of men in the pressed shirts of people who bought and sold land for a living, and Josie took a seat in the back and made herself small and waited. The land parcels went first. The men in pressed shirts bid on those, calm and bored, and the auctioneer, who was really just the county tax assessor with a clipboard, moved through them one at a time. It took an hour. Josie's parcel was near the end. When the assessor read it out, former Oasis Water Park, 14.2 acres, minimum bid $10. A few people chuckled, and one of the men in pressed shirts said something to the other one, and they both smiled and shook their heads. Nobody raised a hand. The assessor looked around the room over the top of his glasses. $10, he said. Anybody. It's 14 acres, folks. Somebody take it off the county's books. He said it like a man who had tried to sell this particular thing before and failed. Josie raised her hand. The room turned to look at her. She felt the looking the way you feel sun on your neck, and she kept her eyes on the assessor and her hands steady. He was a tired man in his 60s, with reading glasses down his nose, and something shifted in his face when he saw her. A young woman in a back-row folding chair with a duffel bag between her feet, and Josie could not read whether it was pity or surprise or simple bureaucratic caution. $10 from the young lady, he said. Anybody else? He waited longer than he had to. Nobody moved. Sold. Parcel 114, Oasis, for $10. 2. He peered at her. You'll need to come sign, miss. She went down front and signed. Her hand was steady on the paper because she made it be. There was a bidder card and a form, and the assessor explained, in the low voice of a man who wanted to be sure she understood what she was doing, that the sale was as is and final, that the county made no warranty, that there was no return. Then he told her the thing she had been braced for, and it was not what she expected. There were no back taxes. That was the whole point of a tax-defaulted sale, he said. The county had already written off what was owed. What she was buying was clean, or as clean as 14 acres of ruined concrete could be. He had her sign in 3 places, and she paid him with the folded 10, and he made change out of a cigar box for the recording fee, which was $4, so that when she walked out of the Delgado County Courthouse, she had $33, a bidder's receipt, and a promise that the deed would come in the mail to whatever address she gave, and she gave the only address she had, which was General Delivery, Harlow, Texas. The assessor caught up with her at the top of the stairs. He had a ring of keys in his hand, 4 keys on a wire loop with a paper tag gone soft and gray. These came with it, he said. County took possession in 22. Padlock on the gate, the maintenance building, and I don't know what the other 2 are. He handed them over, and then he stood there a second longer, and Josie thought he was going to ask her something, why a girl her age wanted a dead water park, or where her people were, and she got ready to give him nothing. But all he said was, "You be careful out there. That place has been empty a while." And then, quieter, almost to himself, Emmett would have hated to see it go for $10. There was that name again. Emmett. Who's Emmett? Josie said. It came out before she could stop it. She was tired, and she owned 14 acres, and for one moment she forgot to be invisible. The assessor looked at her a little strangely. Emmett Rosh built the place. Ran it 40 years. He shook his head. Died a couple years back. No kids, no will anybody could find, so it all went to the county for the taxes. Whole town figured somebody would step up and buy it. Keep it going, on account of what he did for people. Nobody had the money. He shrugged, the same Harlow shrug she had seen on everyone. The shrug that meant a thing was sad and could not be helped. Now a young lady's got it for $10. Life's funny. He nodded at her and went back inside to sell the rest of the county's forgotten things. Josie walked the 3.5 miles back out F meters 219 in the noon heat with $33 in her coffee can and 4 keys in her fist. And she was the owner of the Oasis water park, and she still did not understand what she had done. She only knew the second key on the wire loop was going to open the green metal door of the maintenance building, and that when it did, she would sleep, for the first time in more than a year, in a room that was hers. The key worked. That was the first small miracle, and Josie did not call it a miracle because she did not use words like that, but she felt it in her chest when the old lock turned and the green door swung in on a room that smelled of dust and machine oil and cool concrete. The maintenance building was one long room, maybe 40 feet by 20. Poured floor and cinder block walls painted the pale institutional green of every county building she had ever been in. There was the workbench she had seen through the window, scarred and stained. A pegboard above it, still holding the ghost outlines of tools that were gone. There were metal shelves, some full of paint cans and parts, some empty. There was the wall of pool controls, the big gauges gone dead, a row of levers and valves, and in the back corner, the utility sink and the tiled shower. She tried the sink first. The handle shrieked and coughed and spat brown air, then rusty water. Then, after a full minute, water that ran clear and cold. The county had never had the water shut off. Later, she would understand why, that the same well that fed the park fed a cattle tank on the adjoining lease, and the rancher paid the small standing charge to keep it live. So the Oasis had gone on quietly, pulling clean cold water out of the ground for 4 years after the last child left it. But that afternoon Josie only cupped her hands under the tap and drank until her teeth ached, and then she turned the valve on the shower, and cold water came down out of the wide industrial head, and she stood under it in her clothes a moment before she could make herself believe it. There was no hot water. She did not care. She had not had a private shower, a shower with a door she could shut, in 14 months. She peeled off her clothes and washed herself, and washed her clothes and hung them on the pool control levers to dry. And she stood naked and shivering and clean in a locked concrete room that belonged to her. And Josie Marren, who did not cry, who had trained herself out of it in the third house when she was 9, put her forehead against the cool green wall and shook for a while, and then she stopped, and she wiped her face, and she got to work. Because that was the other thing about Josie. She did not sit in her luck. She used it. By dark that first night she had done a great deal. On the metal shelves, she found a stack of clean painter's drop cloths, a coil of good rope, a box of candles, a flashlight with dead batteries. In a cabinet, she found an old army cot, folded, the canvas sound, and set it up along the back wall. She swept the floor with a push broom that stood in the corner as if it had been waiting for her. Of the 2 other keys, one opened a small office off the main room, a closet-sized space with a metal desk and an empty filing cabinet and a calendar still turned to August of 2019. The last opened nothing she could find, a stubby brass key with a squared head, and she set it aside. That night she lay on the cot in the dark with the green door locked and the cold, clean smell of the concrete around her, and she listened to the mesquite scratch the tin and the far-off yip of coyotes and, under everything, a sound she could not place at first and then could. A low, steady drip somewhere deep, water moving in the dark of the drained pool. And she thought about the man named Emmett Roche, who had built this place and run it 40 years and died with no kids and no will, and about how the whole town said his name in that soft, gone way. And Josie thought, in her plain way, that she would probably never know who he was, and that it did not matter, because he was dead and the park was hers now, and the dead did not need water parks. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about almost all of it, but she would not find out how wrong for another 2 weeks, and in the meantime she did what she always did. She made a life out of what she had. She was careful, in those first days, not to be seen too much. A 19-year-old girl living alone in an abandoned water park was the kind of thing that drew attention, sheriffs and social workers and worse, and she had spent her whole life staying under exactly that kind of attention. So she kept the gate chained behind her and came and went on foot at the edges of the day, and she spent the small money in her coffee can carefully on a jug of bleach and a bag of rice and a box of batteries, and she cleaned the maintenance building until it shone. She got the power on, or found that it was already on. A single live circuit that ran the well pump and 2 outlets. She fixed the flashlight. She caught the day-old bread from the bakery on her way through town, and she found that the well water, boiled on a camp stove she bought used for $4, was better than any water she had ever drunk. And she began, slowly, without meaning to fall in love with the place. That was not a thing she would have admitted, even to herself. But in the long gold evenings, she climbed the stairs of the slide tower to the platform 40 feet up and sat with her legs hanging off the edge, looking out over the whole ruined park and the brown country beyond and the sun going down enormous and red behind the grain elevator in town. From up there, she could see the shape of what it had been. The fan of the wave pool, the loop of the lazy river, the little kiddie pool shaped like a turtle, its paint almost gone. She could see the joy that had been designed into it, deliberately, by someone, and how long it had been since anyone felt that joy. And both things sat in her chest at once, up on the platform in the red light, and she did not have a word for the feeling and did not need one. It was on one of those evenings, sitting on the platform, that she first saw the old woman at the fence. She was a small woman, brown and dry as a mesquite bean, in a straw hat and a man's chambray shirt, and she stood at the rusted chain link with her fingers hooked through it, looking in, not looking at Josie. Looking at the park, the way Josie herself had looked at it that first day. Josie went still on the platform, the way she went still around anyone new, and she waited to see what the woman would do. And what the woman did was stand there for a long time in the failing light, and then say, without turning her head, in a voice that carried clear across the whole quiet property, "He'd be glad somebody's up there again." Josie did not answer. She had learned not to answer strangers. "I saw the smoke from your little stove," the woman said. "2 nights now. Figured it was kids, or a man up to no good. Came to look." She turned her head then and found Josie's shape against the darkening sky, 40 feet up on the slide tower. "You're not either one of those, are you?" "No, ma'am," Josie said. "It was the ma'am that did it." She had not meant to say it. It just came out, the reflex of a girl raised by the state to be polite to authority, and it changed something, because the old woman laughed, a short, dry sound. "Come down from there before you break your neck," the woman said. "I brought food. It's in the truck. I don't expect you'll take it, but I brought it anyhow." And she turned and walked back to an old Ford flatbed parked on the shoulder, and she got a foil-covered dish out of the cab and set it on the flat of the tailgate, and she leaned against the truck and waited, patient as stone, and did not come through the gate. That was the thing that made Josie come down. The waiting outside the gate. The woman understood, somehow, that the gate was Josie's, that inside it was hers, and she would not cross it uninvited. Nobody in 14 months had understood that. Josie came down the tower stairs and crossed the cracked apron of the wave pool and unhooked the chain, and up close the woman's face was 100 fine lines and 2 sharp dark eyes, and she smelled of talcum powder and fried onions, and the dish turned out to be enchiladas, still warm, and a jar of tea. "Ruth Aldana," the woman said. She did not put out her hand. She seemed to know Josie would not take it. "I ran the snack bar here, the pavilion, 30 years, near enough. From when Emmett opened her in 78 till the day she closed." "Josie! Josie!" Ruth said it the way you test a word. "You bought this place, they're saying in town, for $10. She was not asking. Word traveled in Harlow the way water traveled in the dry pool, finding every low place. Girl your age, alone. Her dark eyes went over Josie once, the too thin frame, the duffel bag through the gate, the whole story written plain if you knew how to read it, and Ruth had spent 30 years reading people across a snack counter. But she said none of it. She just pushed the foil dish an inch closer. "Eat! You can hate me for it after." Josie ate. She was too hungry not to, and the enchiladas were the best thing she had eaten in a year, and Ruth watched with a still, sad satisfaction. And when Josie had finished, Ruth drank from the jar of tea and passed it over, and they sat on the tailgate in the last of the light, the young woman and the old one, and Ruth told her about the man named Emmett Rosh. She told it in pieces, the way old people tell things, circling back, and Josie, who had trained herself never to ask questions, found herself asking them, because Ruth was easy to listen to, and the man in the story was starting to take a shape she could not have explained her interest in. Emmett Rosh had built the oasis in 1978, Ruth said, on land his own father had run cattle on, back when Harlow was booming on cotton and the plant was hiring. He had built it with his own hands and a crew of local boys, and he had run it 41 years, and it had been the beating heart of the town's summer for 2 generations. Ruth had worked the pavilion. Emmett had worked everything, the pumps and the gate and the first aid station and the lost child announcements. A big, slow, careful man who knew every family in Harlow by name and knew which kids came for the water and which ones came because the park was the only cool, safe place they had. He let them in free, Ruth said. The ones that needed it. Never made a show of it. A kid would come up to the window with no money, and I'd start to send him off, and Emmett would catch my eye and just... She made a small motion with her hand, a wave through. In you go. Whole summers, some of those kids, on Emmett's dime, and their folks never knew, and the kids figured it was luck. She looked out at the dark park. That was Emmett. He'd rather you thought it was luck than know it was him. And then the plant closed in 2009, and the town started to die. And here Ruth's voice changed, dropped into that soft, gone register Josie had heard all over Harlow. 300 people out of work in a town this size, Ruth said. Delgado meat. Overnight, near enough. Families that had been here 4 generations, packing up, leaving. And you know what Emmett did. She looked at Josie, and Josie shook her head. He kept paying them. Not all of them, he couldn't. But he'd find a man work here that didn't need doing, painting a fence that didn't need painting, so the man could hold his head up and say he had a job. And the ones too old or too sick to work, a check would come. Every month, from nowhere. My Reuben drew one for 6 years. Her jaw worked. The park wasn't making money by then. Nobody left to swim. Emmett was pouring his own money into the ground to keep this town's people fed. And he ran that pool at a loss for 10 years to do it. And he'd have told you it was because he loved the sound of kids in the water. And that was true too. But it wasn't the reason. She was quiet a moment. Nobody ever knew how much he did. That's what I've come to think. We knew a piece each, but nobody knew all of it, because he made sure of it. He'd get downright angry if you thanked him. Why? Josie said. Ruth looked at her a long moment in the dark. That, she said, is the question, isn't it? She screwed the lid back on the empty jar. People in this town think they knew Emmett Roche. 41 years, they'll say, salt of the earth, kindest man in Delgado County. And all of that's true. But I worked next to that man 30 years, and I'm telling you, he was carrying something. A man doesn't spend his whole life quietly holding up a town, giving it all away, unless he's paying for something. Unless he's got a hole in him he's trying to fill. She slid off the tailgate and stood, a small straight shape in the starlight. He wasn't who people thought. He was more than that, and sadder than that, and I never did learn the whole of it. Maybe there wasn't anybody left to tell it to. She folded the foil and took her empty dish and got into the old Ford, and before she pulled the door shut, she looked at Josie one more time, and something crossed her face, a flicker, gone before Josie could name it. You favor somebody, Ruth said slowly. I can't think who. It'll come to me, and she drove off into the dark, taillights bouncing down F meters 219, and Josie stood at the open gate with the taste of enchiladas and the man named Emmett Roche in her head, and she did not sleep well that night, and she could not have told you why. She started draining the pool 3 days later, and she started for the most practical reason in the world. The black standing water in the deep end had begun to stink as the days got hotter. A swampy, rotten smell that carried all the way to the maintenance building when the wind was wrong. And where there was standing water there were mosquitoes, and Josie, who intended to live here through the summer, wanted it gone. That was all. She was not looking for anything. She wanted the smell to stop. It turned out to be harder than tipping over a bucket. The wave pool held the black water in its cracked deep end the way a cupped hand holds rain, and no drain worked, the old main drains long since silted shut. So Josie did it the way she did everything, with what was at hand. In the maintenance building, she found a gasoline transfer pump, the kind ranchers use, seized with age, and she spent 2 days taking it apart on the workbench and coaxing it back to life with a can of oil in her own stubbornness. And on the 3rd day it coughed and caught and ran, and she ran a hose up over the lip of the pool and out to the dry, lazy river, and began, one tankful at a time, to move the black water out of the deep end. It took the better part of a week. She ran the pump until the fuel gave out, an hour at a time, twice a day, and each time the black water dropped an inch or two and the silt beneath showed more, gray-black muck that had been settling for 7 years, full of leaves and a child's flip-flop and a pair of sunglasses, and, once, the small bones of some animal that had come down to drink and could not climb back out. She hauled it out in a 5-gallon bucket, up the sloping floor of the empty pool, load after load, in the heat, until her hands blistered, and the blisters tore and healed into calluses. She was cleaning her pool. She told herself that was all it was, making the place hers the way she had made the maintenance building hers, one hard task at a time. And on the 9th day of it, in the deep end, in the corner where the water had been deepest and the silt was thickest, her shovel struck something that was not concrete and was not silt, something that rang. She thought at first it was a drain grate, or a pipe. She got down on her knees in the muck and dug with her hands, scooping the black silt away, and what she uncovered was a steel plate set flush into the floor of the pool, about 3 feet square, with a raised diamond tread worn smooth and a recessed handle at one edge and, along the other, the shapes of hinges thick with rust. A hatch, a steel hatch, set into the concrete bottom of the deep end, in the one corner, under 9 feet of water when the pool was full, where no swimmer would ever have found it, and no one draining the pool in the ordinary way would ever have looked, because who looks at the floor of a swimming pool? Josie sat back on her heels in the muck and looked at it for a long time. She was not a fanciful person. She did not think, a secret door, treasure, any of the things a different person might have thought. She thought, in her plain way, that a water park would have machinery under it, pumps and pipes and filters, and that this was probably a service hatch down to some pump vault, sealed for years, full of foul water and dead things and worth exactly nothing. But it was hers, and she wanted to know what was under her own floor, and not knowing would gnaw at her. So she cleaned the silt off the hatch and found the recessed handle frozen with rust, and went and got a length of pipe from the maintenance building for a cheater bar, and the wire loop of 4 keys, and she remembered the 4th key, the stubby brass one with the squared head that had opened nothing. There was a keyway in the hatch, filled with grime. She dug it out with a nail. The stubby brass key slid in and turned with a grinding reluctance that told her it had not turned in a very long time, and something in the hatch let go with a heavy clunk that she felt through her knees. It took her the rest of that day and half her strength to lift it. The hinges were rusted, almost solid, the hatch thick steel and heavier than she was, and she levered it with the pipe an inch at a time and packed the gap with wood and levered again. And when it finally came up and over and dropped back against the pool floor with a boom that echoed off the slide tower, Josie was on her back in the muck, soaked in sweat and black water. She lay a moment breathing, then rolled over and looked down into the hole. Cold air came up out of it, cool and dry and smelling of earth and, faintly, of paper. There was a steel ladder bolted to the concrete wall of a shaft, and the shaft went down maybe 12 feet, and at the bottom, in the light of her flashlight, was not water, not machinery, but a floor. A dry, poured concrete floor, and a passage leading off from it, square and man-made, into the dark under the park. Josie went and got the flashlight with the good batteries, and she went down the ladder. The passage was a tunnel, poured concrete, high enough to stand in, wide enough for one person, and dry as a bone, which meant it had been sealed against the water table, and sealed well, by someone who cared how it was built. It ran, by her count of paces, about 60 feet, roughly back toward the maintenance building, and along one wall ran a conduit of the same kind that fed the pool controls, a service line connecting the pump house to something at the far end. The air stayed cool and dry. Her flashlight beam bounced ahead off a blank concrete wall where the tunnel ended. And in that wall was a door. It was not a wooden door or a green metal county door. It was a vault door, a real one, round-cornered and massive, set in a frame of poured concrete, the kind of door you saw in an old bank, gray steel with a spoked wheel handle in the center and a combination dial and, below the dial, a keyhole. Stenciled across the face of it in white paint gone yellow was a single word: payroll. Josie stood in the flashlight beam and looked at the vault door and felt her heart going hard against her ribs, and she made herself breathe, and she made herself think. A water park handled cash, she told herself. 40 years ago, before cards, a place like this took in cash all summer and paid its crew of teenagers on Fridays, And a careful man, one who built a tunnel dry enough to last 50 years, was exactly the kind who would put a real vault under his park to keep it safe. That was all this was. A payroll vault. It would be empty, or hold some moldy ledgers and a few dollars in old bills. And it had been sealed since before she was born, and there was no reason on earth for her heart to be going the way it was. She tried the wheel. It would not turn. The dial spun freely, uselessly, 40 years out of anyone's memory. But there was the keyhole under the dial, and Josie thought of the keys, and she had used the stubby brass one on the hatch, and none of the other three had fit anything, and she went cold with the certainty that she had no way through this door, and would have to spend money she did not have on a locksmith or a torch. And then she remembered the office. The little office off the maintenance building, with the metal desk and the calendar turned to August 2019. She had gone through that desk her first week and found it stripped, drawers empty. But the bottom drawer had stuck, and she had left it. She went up the ladder now and across the ruined pool and into the office, and worked the stuck bottom drawer open with her fingers, and there was nothing in it but dust and dead flies, and taped to the underside of the desktop above it, where a person's knees would go, a small manila envelope, soft with age. Inside the envelope was a key, a flat steel key, long, with a complicated bit, the kind of key that fit exactly one lock in the world, and a slip of paper, folded once, with a column of numbers in a careful hand, and above the numbers, underlined twice, dial, left, right, left, stop. Josie's hands were not steady now, and she did not try to make them be. She went back down into the tunnel with the key and the paper, and stood at the vault door in the cold, dry dark, and followed the numbers on the dial, left, right, left, the way the paper said, and on the last one she felt something inside shift and settle. Then she put the long steel key in the keyhole under the dial and turned it, and turned the spoked wheel, and it turned, groaning, the whole way around, and the bolts drew back with a sound like a heavy sigh, and the vault door swung open on a darkness that had been sealed for years, and cool paper-smelling air breathed out over her, and Josie Marren pointed the flashlight inside and saw what Emmett, Rosh, had spent 40 years hiding under the floor of his water park. It was a room. A concrete room, maybe 12 feet square, dry and cool, and lined on 3 sides with steel shelving and a bank of gray filing cabinets. And it was not empty, and it was not full of cash. It was full of paper. Ledgers, dozens of them, the big cloth-bound accounting kind, standing in rows on the shelves with years inked on their spines. Boxes of file folders. Bound stacks of what looked like check registers. A steel desk, smaller than the one upstairs, with a green shaded lamp on it and a chair pushed neatly in. And on the desk, squared to its edge as if someone had set it down and meant to come right back, a single leather-covered book, worn soft at the corners, with no year on it, only a small paper label in the same careful hand. Private. Josie did not touch the private book, not that first day. Something told her it was the last thing, not the first. Instead, she found the light switch by the door, an old brass toggle, and flicked it, not expecting anything, and the green-shaded lamp on the desk came on. The same live circuit that fed her shower fed this room too, down the conduit through the tunnel, and it had been waiting 4 years since the county took the park and 7 since Emmett last came down here. A single bulb ready to light the moment someone found the switch. Josie turned in a slow circle in the yellow-green light of Emmett Rosh's hidden room, and then she pulled the neat chair out and sat down, and took down the first ledger her hand fell on, the one with 1979 on the spine, the park's first full year, and opened it, because she wanted to understand what she had found, and she started, that evening, to read. She read for 4 hours, until the lamp swam in front of her eyes and her stomach reminded her she had not eaten. And in those 4 hours she understood the first layer of what Emmett Rosh had been. The ledgers were the books of the Oasis Water Park, kept by hand, year by year, in the same careful writing, and at first they were exactly what you would expect. Ticket sales, concession receipts, payroll for the summer crew, teenagers mostly, $5 an hour, 6, their names written out in full, Fridays circled, chlorine and pump parts and paint. The ordinary arithmetic of a business trying to make a living out of a hot, dry town's need to get cool. Josie could follow it. She was good with numbers, and there was something steadying in the columns, the way they added up, the plain, honest math of a place that worked. But the further she read, the more she found the other column. It was there from the beginning, small at first, then growing. Every ledger had a second set of entries, kept just as carefully, but these were not sales and they were not payroll. They were payments out, to names, not for anything, just names and amounts and a date, month after month, year after year. In 1983, it was a few $100s a year. By 1995, it was thousands. And after 2009, the year Ruth had said the way you say the name of a flood, the year the meatpacking plant closed, the column exploded down the page, name after name after name, 40 of them, 60, each with a monthly amount beside it, and beside many of the names, in a smaller hand, a note. Widow. Plant, 20 years. Back trouble. Kids. Reuben Aldana, plant, and a monthly figure, month after month for 6 years, exactly as Ruth had said. Josie sat in the hidden room and understood that she was reading a record no one had ever been meant to see, the proof of the thing the whole town half knew and no one knew the whole of. Emmett Rosh had spent 40 years quietly paying to keep Harlow alive, and he had kept the books of it here in a sealed vault under his pool, so that no one he helped would ever have to know it was him, so they could go on thinking it was luck. The park had never made money after the plant closed. He had run it at a loss for a decade, pouring in his own money, and Josie flipped to the back pages and found the source of it, a private account drawn down and drawn down, a man spending his whole fortune $100 at a time on people who never knew his name was on the check. She closed the 1979 ledger and sat in the green light with her hands flat on the cover, and she thought about the man at the Dairy Mart saying, of course Emmett covered it. And she thought about Ruth saying he had a hole in him, that he was paying for something, that a man does not give his whole life away unless he is trying to fill up a hole. And Josie looked at the little leather book on the desk, the one marked private, and she knew that whatever the hole was, the answer was in that book, and she was not ready. Not that night. She turned off the green lamp and climbed up the tunnel and out of the pool into the enormous starlit dark, and she lay on her cot and did not sleep. And the man named Emmett Rosh, who she had never met, who had been dead 2 years, felt closer to her than anyone living. She stayed away from the private book for 2 more days. She told herself it was because there was work to do, and there was, but the truth was that she was afraid of it, and Josie did not often let herself be afraid of anything, and being afraid of a small leather book on a dead man's desk unsettled her more than the vault ever had. On the 3rd day, she made herself go down. She brought her camp stove and boiled coffee in the hidden room so she would not have to come up, and she sat in the neat chair in the green light, and she took the book marked private off the desk and opened it to the first page. It was not an account book. It was a journal, and it began with a date, the 9th of June, 2006, and the first line, in Emmett Rosh's careful hand, was this: Daniel is gone. She left in the night. I do not know where. Josie read the name, and the world went very quiet and very small, down to the circle of green light and the soft old page under her hand. Daniel. She told herself it was a common name. She told herself there was no reason. She kept reading. The journal was the record of a search, and it broke Josie's heart slowly, over hours, one careful entry at a time. Emmett Rosh had had a daughter. Her name was Danielle. She had grown up at the Oasis, and Josie read whole entries about that, written backward in grief. Danielle at 6 in the turtle pool. Danielle at 14 learning to run the pump. Danielle in the red suit her last 2 summers, lifeguarding the wave pool, a whistle around her neck. The best swimmer he ever taught, the meanest temper he ever met. My whole heart and I never once said it right. Josie read that line 4 times, and she thought of the photograph in her duffel bag, the girl in the red suit with the silver whistle, laughing in front of a wall of blue water, and she got up from the chair, shaking, and made herself sit back down, because she had to know, and reading was the only way to know. There had been a fight. Emmett wrote around it, ashamed, in pieces, over many entries. Danielle at 19 had wanted to leave Harlow, and there had been a boy Emmett did not trust, and Emmett had said things a father should not say, hard, proud things, an ultimatum, and Danielle had a temper as hard and proud as his own, and one night in June of 2006 she had packed a bag and driven off in her mother's car and not come back, and the last thing she had said to him, he wrote, was that he loved this town more than he loved her, and that he could keep it, and Emmett had let her go, because he was proud, because he was sure she would come back in a week, in a month, the way she always had. She did not come back. The rest of the journal, years of it, was the record of a man looking for his daughter and never finding her. He had hired a lawyer and then an investigator, a man named Prewitt out of Abilene, and there were entries copying out what Prewitt reported: a sighting in Amarillo, a job at a diner in Odessa, an address that was cold by the time Emmett drove to it. Danielle moved and changed and did not want to be found, and every time Emmett got close, she was already gone. And then, in an entry dated the spring of 2007, Prewitt had learned the thing that changed everything, and Emmett had written it in a hand that shook. Danielle has had a child, a girl, born in March. I am a grandfather, and I have never seen her face. Josie sat in the green light with the boiled coffee going cold beside her, and she could not breathe. She read on because she could not stop. Emmett's search doubled after that. He was looking for two now, his daughter and the granddaughter he had never met, and the journal filled with a different kind of desperation: addresses, phone numbers, the names of caseworkers, sums of money sent to lawyers to find a child who kept slipping through the system's hands. Daniel was struggling. That much came through even in the careful lines, moving town to town, in trouble sometimes, the little girl with her, and then Josie read, not with her. There was an entry in the winter of 2014 that was only 4 words long, and Emmett had pressed so hard with the pen that the words tore the page. Prewitt called. Danielle died. Josie put the book down and put her face in her hands in the hidden room under the pool, and she cried the way she had not cried since she was 9 years old, huge and silent and shaking, and the man who had wept those same 4 words onto that same page 12 years before had been her grandfather, and neither of them had ever known the other was in the world. She could not read any more that day. She climbed up out of the pool with the private book held against her chest and walked out through the gate and down F meters 219 in the dark, 3.5 miles, without deciding to, into town, and stood in the road in front of the little frame house where she had learned Ruth Aldana lived. There was a light on. Josie stood a long time unable to make herself knock, and then the porch light came on and the door opened, because Ruth was old and slept poorly and had heard the gate, and Ruth looked out at the girl in her road at 11 at night with a book against her chest and a face wrecked with crying, and said, very softly, "Oh," and put her hand to her mouth. "Oh, child, I know who you favor now. I've known 3 days and been afraid to say. You favor Danielle." They sat up the whole night at Ruth's kitchen table, and Josie learned the rest of it, the parts Emmett's journal could not tell, because Emmett had not known them. Ruth had known Danielle since the day she was born, had watched her grow up in the pavilion in the pool, had loved her, the wild, proud girl with her father's stubborn chin, and had grieved when she left and grieved worse when the word came, years later, that she had died somewhere out west. And Ruth went to a drawer and took out an old photograph of her own and set it in front of Josie, and it was the same girl. The red suit, the silver whistle. The wall of blue water that Josie now knew was the wave pool of the oasis, 40 feet from where she had been sleeping. Danielle at 18, laughing on the pool deck, the summer before she left. Ruth had taken it herself, and Josie laid her own photograph, soft as cloth, beside it, 2 prints of a life, the town's memory and the daughter's only inheritance, side by side on an old woman's table, and Ruth looked from the photographs to Josie's face and back and said, "You have his eyes. Emmett's eyes. I should have known the first night, you sitting up on that tower where he used to sit." And she reached across the table and took Josie's blistered, calloused hand in her 2 dry ones, and for once Josie let her. "He looked for you," Ruth said. "All those years. He never said it out loud. That wasn't Emmett, but I knew. That was the hole in him. His girl was out there somewhere and a grandbaby he'd never seen, and he couldn't find you, and he poured everything he had into this town because you were the one thing he couldn't buy back. He'd have given every dollar and every acre for one afternoon with you." She pressed Josie's hand. "And you were in a foster home 140 miles away the whole time, under a name he didn't have. Marren. Your daddy's name. That's why Prewitt never found you. You dropped clean out of the world the day they took you, and Emmett died 4 years later not knowing if you were alive." Her old eyes filled. "And then you drove into Harlow with $47 and bought his water park for 10 to have a place to take a shower. Child." She shook her head slowly. "Child, do you understand what you've done? You came home. You just didn't know it was home. Josie could not speak. She sat with her hand in Ruth's and looked at the 2 photographs of her mother, and she thought about the pull she had felt at the fence that first day, the thing in her chest she had no word for, looking up at the blue slide against the white sky. She had told herself she did not believe in signs. She still did not exactly. But she had walked half the length of Texas on other people's kindness and ended up, by every accident in the world, standing at the fence of the one place on earth where a man had spent 18 years waiting for her, and she did not have a word for that either, and she did not need one. The third layer of it, the one that changed her future, was waiting in the filing cabinets, and Josie and Ruth found it together over the next several days, because Josie would not go back down into the vault alone now. And Ruth, who was 71 and had bad knees, went down the ladder anyway, one careful rung at a time, and sat in the neat chair while Josie went through the gray steel drawers. Most of it was the ledger's backing paper, decades of canceled checks and receipts. But the bottom drawer of the last cabinet was different. It was a legal drawer, hanging files, labeled in Emmett's hand, and the labels were words like deed and trust and will. And Josie lifted them out one at a time and laid them on the little desk under the green lamp, and she read them slowly. And some of them she did not understand and set aside for someone who would. There was the deed to the 14 acres, the original, Emmett Rosh's name on it, free and clear. And there was a document establishing something called the Oasis Fund, dated 2011, a trust, and even Josie could follow enough of the language to see what it was. Emmett had taken the private account he had been paying the town out of and made it permanent. He had put money into a trust at First Cattleman's Bank of Harlow, with rules that its income go on quietly supporting the former employees of Delgado Meat Company and of the Oasis and their surviving families, month by month, exactly as he had been doing by hand, so that it would go on after he was gone. There was a schedule attached, the same names from the ledgers, updated in a shakier and shakier hand as Emmett got old. The trust was still there. It had never stopped. Josie would learn, when the lawyer explained it, that it held $412,000, and that its little checks had gone on arriving in Harlow mailboxes all through the years the park stood dead behind its rusted fence, and not one person in town had ever connected the money that kept them afloat to the drained pool out on F meters 219. And there was a will. It was a proper will, drawn up and signed and witnessed, dated the spring of 2016, and it named a lawyer, Marion Teasley, of Teasley and Cobb, in the county seat. Josie sat in the green light and read her dead grandfather's last wishes, one long act of a man reaching into a future he would not live to see. The trust was to go on. The deed, the 14 acres and everything on them, and the balance of a separate private account, all of it was left. And Josie read the words 3 times to be sure of them, to my daughter, Danielle Rosh, and if she does not survive me, to her child, my grandchild, whom I have never met and never stopped seeking, wherever she may be found. And below that, in a codicil added in 2019 when he must have known Danielle was gone and was down to one hope, Emmett had instructed Marion Teasley to keep looking, to keep the estate open while there was any chance the grandchild lived. He had failed. He had died in 2024 with the search unfinished, and the law had done what the law does, and let the park go to the county for the taxes while the trust and the private account sat untouched at the bank, and the will sat sealed in a vault under the floor, waiting for a girl who would buy the whole thing back for $10 without knowing any of it was hers by blood. Josie took the will and the trust and the deed to Marion Teasley the following week. Ruth drove her the 40 miles in the old Ford. Marion Teasley turned out to be a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a corner office over the hardware store. And when Josie laid the documents on her desk and said, plainly, in her flat, steady voice, that she believed she was Danielle Rosh's daughter, Marion Teasley went very still, and then she took off her reading glasses and looked at Josie's face for a long moment, and said, I have been trying to find you for 8 years. Emmett hired me to find you before he died, and I could not, and it has sat on me every day since. She put her glasses back on so Josie would not see her eyes. Let's do this right. Let's make sure. And then, young lady, I am going to hand you your grandfather's estate. Doing it right took the rest of the summer. There were records to pull. The birth certificate from the shoebox the state still had, Danielle Rosh named as mother, and Josie's own foster file, and a DNA test Marion Teasley arranged against a sample Emmett had left with her years before for exactly this purpose. A careful man reaching forward again, providing even his own blood so a grandchild he never found could one day be proven his. The test came back, the way everyone already knew it would. Josephine Marren was the biological granddaughter of Emmett Roche, the sole surviving descendant named in his will, and the lawful heir to the Oasis Fund, the 14 acres, and the private account, which had gone on quietly earning interest for 8 years and stood, when Marion Teasley finally read her the figure, at $88,000. It was during that summer of proving it that the man came. His name was Dale Roche, Emmett's brother's son, a heavy, florid man of about 55 who ran a farm equipment lot 2 towns over. He had shown up at Emmett's funeral in 2024 and left disappointed because there had been nothing to inherit that anyone could find. And he had assumed, like everyone, that the old man had given it all away and died with empty pockets. But word had traveled in Delgado County the way it always did, the way water finds the low places, that a girl out at the dead oasis had found something under the pool, that there was money after all, a trust, a will. And Dale Roche had gotten himself a lawyer and filed a claim contesting Josie's inheritance, arguing that the girl was a stranger and an opportunist, that the will was old and the estate had escated to the county, that as Emmett's nearest proven blood relation, the whole thing ought by rights to come to him. He came out to the park once, in a big clean truck, and stood at the rusted fence where Ruth had first stood, and he did not wait outside the gate the way Ruth had. He came through it, and he looked at the ruined slides and the drained pool and the little maintenance building where Josie lived, and he said a number of things to her, that she was not fooling anybody, that blood tests could be wrong, that he would tie this up in court for years and she did not have the money to fight him, that she had better take a settlement and go back to wherever she had come from. Josie stood on the apron of the wave pool with her arms folded and her flat, still face and let him talk, the way she had let a great many angry people talk over 19 years, and when he was done, she said only one thing. "He looked for me for 18 years, she said. "You came to the funeral to see if there was money. You didn't even know I existed. He did. He never stopped." And she unfolded her arms and pointed at the open gate, not angry, just done. And after a moment, because there was nothing in her face to push against, Dale Roche turned red and left. The contest did not last. Marion Teasley had spent 40 years in Delgado County courtrooms, and she laid the will and the DNA and the birth records in front of the judge, and she had Ruth Aldana testify, and Ruth stood up in her Sunday dress and told the court, in her dry, clear voice, about a girl named Danielle in a red suit, and about the eyes Josie had, and about a man who had built a trust to keep a whole town alive, and left everything in his own hand to a grandchild he had never stopped seeking. The judge did not take long. Emmett Roche had written exactly what he wanted and provided his own blood to prove it, and the law, which had failed the old man in his life, did right by him at last. Dale Roche's claim was dismissed. He did not appeal. Josie never saw him again, and she did not go looking, because she had no use for him and less for revenge. She had watched, her whole life, what happened to people who carried their grievances like coins in a coffee can. She set hers down. That was the winter Josie stopped being homeless and started being, though the word came slowly and strangely to her, an owner, not of a ruin, of a thing that could live again. She was 19 years old, and she had $88,000 in her name and 14 acres and a trust worth $412,000 more. And the first thing she did with any of it was the thing that told Ruth and Marion Teasley, and eventually the whole of Harlow, exactly whose blood was in her. She did not touch the trust. She left the Oasis Fund exactly as her grandfather had built it, and the little checks from nowhere went on arriving in Harlow's mailboxes, the widows and the old plant men who were still living. And now Josie signed them. In a careful hand she taught herself to make careful, the way his had been. She did not tell the people who got them. She kept it the way he had kept it, so they could go on thinking it was luck. Ruth told her once that she did not have to carry that, a whole town, at 19, and Josie said she knew she did not have to, and that she was going to anyway, and Ruth looked at her a long time and did not argue. And she reopened the pool. It took 2 years and most of the $88,000 and the help of half the town, men who had drawn Emmett's checks showing up with their own tools to patch the concrete they had poured as young men, because word had finally gotten out. All of it, the vault and the ledgers and the search, and Harlow had learned at last the whole of what Emmett Roche had been and what it owed him, and a town will do a great deal to pay a debt like that. They fixed the wave machine. They scrubbed the blue back into the big pool. They rebuilt the roof of the pavilion, and Ruth Aldana, 73 now, stood behind the snack counter on opening day and rang the first sale. And when a kid came up to the window with no money in his fist, Josie, watching from the pool deck, caught Ruth's eye and made a small motion with her hand, a wave through, in you go, and Ruth's face broke open and she had to turn away before she could work. The register. The Oasis opened again on Memorial Day, 48 years to the day after Emmett Roche opened it the first time. Josie put no name on any of it, no plaque, no dedication, because that was not how her grandfather had done things, and she was his in that as in the eyes. But she hung one thing, in a plain frame, on the wall of the little office off the maintenance building where she still, by choice, kept a cot and took her cold showers, because some habits of thrift do not leave a person, and she did not want them to. She hung the photograph. Daniel, 18 years old, in the red suit with the silver whistle, laughing on the deck of the wave pool in the summer before she left, in front of a wall of bright blue water. And below it, small, the slip of paper from the manila envelope, in Emmett's careful hand, that Josie had kept, the numbers to the vault, left, right, left, stop, the combination to the room where he had hidden his whole heart and waited for someone to come and find it. People asked her, sometimes, in the years after, how it felt to have found a fortune under an old swimming pool. Josie never had a good answer for them, because the fortune was never the thing, and she could not make them understand that. The vault could have been empty, and it would have changed nothing that mattered. What she had found under the wave pool was not money. It was that she had been looked for, that in all the years she was moving from house to house under a name that was not his, unwanted, unclaimed, a girl who owned nothing so that nothing could be taken from her. There had been a man in a dry town in Texas who had never once stopped wanting her, who had left a light burning down a tunnel under a pool for 18 years so that whoever she turned out to be, whenever she came, there would be something waiting that said, plainly, in the only language he had, "You were mine and I looked for you until the day I died." The water had been drained out of the Oasis for 7 years when Josie Marren found it, but the well underneath had never once run dry, and neither, it turned out, had the man who dug it, and in the end the girl he could not find walked in on her own 2 feet and found him.